Saturn Cube Theory Explained. Part 6. The Demiurge, the Archons, and the False Light. There is a moment in every deep conspiracy story where the question changes. Up until now, we have been asking what the system is. The cube, the grid, the cage of time, rules, and repetition. But eventually the question shifts from what to who. If the cube represents a structure that limits consciousness, then what intelligence maintains that structure? If the system feeds on fear, compliance, and forgetfulness, then what benefits from it? And if reality itself feels engineered to keep human awareness small, distracted, and divided, then who designed the engine? This is where the Saturn Cube Theory crosses into older territory. Not modern conspiracy, ancient cosmology. This is where the name appears that changes everything, the Demiurge. In Gnostic tradition, the Demiurge is not the highest god. It is not the source of all being. It is a craftsman, a builder, a ruler of matter. According to these teachings, the true divine source is infinite, unknowable beyond form. But the material world, the world of time, decay, and hierarchy, was shaped by a lesser intelligence that mistook itself for the highest authority. The Demiurge creates systems, not life in its wild, overflowing form, but order, law, measurement, control. And here is where Saturn enters the story again, because Saturn, in symbol and archetype, represents exactly this kind of power. Time, limitation, structure, authority, judgment. The Demiurge is often described as the god of this world, not the creator of souls, but the warden of matter, not the source of light, but the administrator of reality as a system. In this worldview, the Demiurge rules through law, not love, through fear, not freedom, through obedience, not awakening. And it does not rule alone, it has helpers. They are called the Archons. The word Archon means ruler, authority, or governor. In Gnostic texts, the Archons are forces that manage different layers of reality. They are not always described as beings with faces. Sometimes they are presented as functions, programs, patterns of influence. Each Archon governs an aspect of the system: time, desire, fear, shame, identity, memory. They are the mechanisms through which the Demiurge maintains control. And here is the unsettling part. The Archons do not need to attack you. They do not need to possess you. They only need you to forget who you are. Their greatest weapon is distraction, noise, urgency, endless stimulation, endless rules, endless judgment. In this theory, the Archons do not imprison the soul with chains. They imprison it with stories. Stories about who you are. Stories about what matters. Stories about what is possible. Stories about what is allowed. And the most powerful story of all is the story of false light. This is where many people misunderstand the Saturn Cube Theory. It is not a theory that says darkness rules the world openly. It says the system rules by pretending to be the light. False light does not look evil. It looks righteous, organized, moral, responsible. False light tells you to behave, obey, sacrifice, and wait. It tells you salvation is external. That truth is granted by authority. That freedom comes later. False light offers structure without spirit, law without love, order without life. In this framework, the Demiurge presents itself as the highest god, jealous, demanding, punitive, not because it is the ultimate source, but because it does not know there is anything beyond itself. This is where Saturn's symbolism becomes almost unavoidable. Saturn, as the god of time, devours his children. Time consumes life. Schedules consume presence. Productivity consumes joy. Saturn, as the ruler of harvest, cuts what grows. Saturn, as the lord of karma, keeps score. Saturn, as the father principle, disciplines and restricts. The Saturn cube, then, is not just a prison. It is a worldview where everything must be measured to matter, where value comes from output, where worth is conditional, where time is scarce and fear is necessary. The Archons thrive in this environment because fear creates compliance, shame creates silence, confusion creates dependence. And now we reach a critical turning point in the story. Because if the Demiurge and the Archons rule through false light, then real liberation cannot come through more rules, more effort, or more obedience. It must come through recognition. This is where the concept of gnosis enters. Gnosis does not mean belief. It means knowing, not intellectual knowledge, but direct awareness. The sudden remembering of something that was never truly lost. In Gnostic texts, salvation is not earned, it is remembered. The Archons lose power the moment they are seen clearly, not resisted, seen, because they cannot dominate awakened consciousness. They rely on confusion, on identification. on the belief that the system is all there is. This is why the Demiurge is sometimes described as blind, not evil in the cartoon sense, but limited, trapped in its own creation. It believes the material world is ultimate because it cannot perceive beyond it. And this brings us to the most controversial claim in the Saturn Cube Theory, that what we often call God in institutional religion may actually be the Demiurge, a ruler of systems, a god of law, a god of punishment, a god of hierarchy, while the true source, the infinite divine, remains beyond names, beyond fear, beyond control. This idea is not meant to attack faith. It is meant to explain why so many people feel spiritually suffocated instead of liberated, why religion sometimes feels like a cage instead of a doorway, why morality feels imposed instead of embodied, why obedience is praised more than compassion. In this worldview, institutions serve the cube, not because they are malicious, but because systems naturally align with system energy. Centralization, authority, uniformity. The Archons do not need to invent lies. They only need to curate truth. They allow just enough light to keep people compliant, enough hope to prevent rebellion, enough guilt to prevent awakening. And this is where the Saturn Cube Theory becomes deeply personal, because the Archons are not only external, they live in the mind. Every time you silence your intuition to follow approval, every time you choose fear over truth, every time you accept a small life because it feels safer, that is how the system sustains itself. But here's the key insight of Part 6. The Demiurge does not fear force, it fears awareness. It fears people who no longer mistake structure for truth, law for love, order for meaning. It fears those who stop outsourcing their authority. This is why awakening stories across cultures always emphasize inner knowing, eyes opening, veils lifting, chains falling without a fight. The cube only works if you believe it is reality. Once you see it as a construct, its walls begin to thin. This is why Gnostic texts were buried, burned, labeled heretical, not because they were dangerous in a political sense, but because they removed the middleman. They said you do not need permission to know God. You do not need a system to access truth. You do not need fear to be moral, and that message is poison to any structure that rules through control. So if Part 5 showed us the cage, Part 6 shows us the warden, not a monster with horns, but a manager with rules. Not darkness, but false light. The Demiurge does not want you evil. It wants you small, predictable, contained. And the Archons do not want your soul. They want your attention, because attention is energy, and energy fuels the system. The Saturn Cube Theory does not ask you to fear these ideas. It asks you to recognize them, to notice when fear is being used as leverage, when guilt is being used as glue, when authority replaces truth. And in that recognition, something shifts. The cube does not disappear, but it loses its power. Because the moment you see the system, you are no longer fully inside it. And that is where the next part of the story takes us. Because once the false light is exposed, the question becomes unavoidable. If the Demiurge rules the material world and the Archons maintain the grid, then what breaks the system? What interrupts the loop? What opens the cage? And whether that key came in the form of rebellion, remembrance, or sacrifice, that is where the story goes next.